Yeah, hi folks. Now I know many of you have already seen Ian Wishart's Climate of Fear report, but I still think it's worth covering because his research really exposes the frauds at NIWA, who are scaring the hell out of children based on fraudulent data. They are saying Gabrielle is the biggest cyclone New Zealand has had, which is simply not true. In the 22 years from 1868 to 1890, he found 20 bowler-sized events, 5 of which were bigger than Gabrielle. And 83% of those were conveniently missing from NIWA's database. And not only that, his research debunks the notion that climate change is man-made, because in the 1800s we had a low-carbon climate that was about 1.5 degrees colder. Anyway, today I'll start this off with a brief intro into his research, which I recorded yesterday. Methodology. I decided to research the archives at Papers Past, searching for barometer readings with a 28, reflecting the preferred measurement unit of the time, inches of mercury. The lower the inches of mercury, the less weight of atmosphere, translating to low pressure. A barometer reading of 28.99 inches, for example, converts to a cyclone bowler-sized low of 981.7 hectopascals. Bowler was 982, or 29 inches. Barometers need to be standardized for accurate comparison, and the standard used then and now was correction to sea level pressure. Barometers measure the weight of air, so devices at higher altitudes will read lower because air density decreases with height. To best avoid confusion, I chose to use barometer readings which were professionally taken. This could be explicit, such as a report from an official observatory or a ship, or contextual, where the source was not defined, but it might have been included in a report of port arrivals and departures, strongly indicating an official maritime source. Where possible, corroboration was obtained by researching the storm event in detail to locate a spread of readings from the same or other locations. To make the sample size manageable, the years 1868 to 1890 were chosen. Search terms included barometer, 28, storm, gale, cyclone, and hurricane. Note, online references to modern storms often quote the minimum low pressure ever reached, usually while still in the tropics. For comparison to historic New Zealand events, the lowest New Zealand figures must be obtained. Now, this is an excellent report, and with each climate event, Wishart gives the size of each event, whether it's included in the NIWA database or not, and references. Now I'll stop it there, folks, and you can see the rest of that in the link below. Now to Ian Wishart's first interview from about a week ago.
This report you've produced, Climate of Fear, and there's a lot on it. I want you to give me the headline takeout on this, Ian, to your point of view.
Well, the biggest one is, like you, I was thinking, well, are we in an era of more extreme weather? So I decided to go back through papers past after Gabrielle and take a damn good look. And it turns out that most of the extreme weather events in our past are missing from NIWA's database.
What? What do you mean missing?
They're not there. They don't appear. NIWA has put out a historical weather events database that's used by journalists, climate journalists and researchers to pull up instantly for those explainers and fact-checking things. This is what happened in the past. 83%, I think, is the exact figure, of the major events bigger than bowler aren't in there.
What?
Yeah, they're missing. They're just not there. NIWA, I think, have it's either a resource issue or I didn't see the narrative issue. I don't know.
Yeah, narrative issue for sure.
Give me some examples of big weather events on the scale of Gabrielle that aren't being reported because NIWA has deliberately or accidentally erased them from our statistical memory.
In the Climate of Fear report, it reveals basically there's about 20 boulder-sized events that hit New Zealand within a space of 22 years. And
when was this? When was this?
I just picked the time period it ran, beginning with the February 1868 storm that hit New Zealand and ending in 1890, so 22 years, because there's so many weather entries in papers past that you...
Okay, papers past. Now, this is from Papers Past, which is free for everyone. All you need to do is fill out the search criteria down here and search like Ian did. It's freely available for everyone.
You spend a year going through them all. So I picked a data set that I could manage and went through them. And during those 22 years, there's around 24 events that have hit New Zealand at the size of bowler, average of one a year. And to put that in perspective, NIWA, when they did their big release last week about how Gabrielle was the biggest of them all, found 3 in the last 60 years, basically.
So actually the extreme weather used to be worse, and that was kind of pre-serious industrialisation on the globe, wasn't it?
Yeah, two factors to consider. There was a low-carbon economy, there was no SUVs being driven around, and the weather was about 1.5 degrees colder than it is now. So those two things. But despite that fact, big cyclones and big storms in New Zealand were far more frequent than they are now.
Far more frequent than they are now.
And they were far bigger. They covered more area. They had a deeper load. The test of the Climate of Fear report is barometric pressure. The scientists are figuring out that the low on the weather map is what allows storm surge. That's the sea rising, and sea rise can be 2, 3, 4, even 14 metres in a record event in Australia. So the storm surge is what causes coastal inundation. That's what they're really worried about with sea level rise and climate change. And these storms in the past, they're massive monsters. To give you an example, just briefly, Gabrielle is estimated at 963 hectopascals as its ultimate low in New Zealand. One of the big storms we cover in Climate of Fear report was 948 hectopascals, much, much lower. Cyclone Gabrielle, which sank the Wahine, 968 hectopascals. Another storm hit Auckland, 955. So the history of our weather systems is that we have been hit repeatedly, much, much harder. There's reports in the Climate of Fear from papers past of people watching half of Greymouth being washed away into the sea, or Norsewood in the Hawke's Bay being razed to the ground by flames in a drought. So we've had extreme weather events, and we've had them frequently.
So look, I guess you take what you've published here to its logical conclusion that would suggest that we're in the grips of an irrational hysteria about climate change right now.
Yeah, I think the Climate of Fear report, and there's two things you can take from the Climate of Fear report. First is the usual suspects who do explainers and fact-checking have not attacked this report. They won't.
But NIWA has just responded, and I'll get to that in a moment.
Won't go near it. Secondly, the report raises a fundamental question. Is what we're being told about extreme weather and climate real? Does it link up the way that they say it does, or is it wrong? because what we're seeing from the historical past is that when New Zealand was colder and was lower carbon, we got hit by far more storms and bigger storms than we're getting now.
The opposite of what they're preaching now.
So despite the fact we're taking some punishment at the moment, it was nothing compared to what our predecessors and ancestors took in 155 years ago.
All right. Have you asked NIWA for a please explain as to how they lost all this data or missed it?
Yeah, they're working on it. I've been
what do you mean they're working on it?
I raised this issue with them first on Twitter, and they came back and admitted that the data wasn't there, but they were trying to think of various reasons as to why that they had to go with definite barometer readings and that sort of thing. And I pointed out to them the ones we'd used were from port authorities and ships, and back in the 1850s and 1860s.
The tech was pretty good.
They lived and died on the barometer readings. If they got it wrong, the ship sank. So they got their readings right. NIWA's got it wrong.
Now here's NIWA's response, or should I say pathetic excuse.
This is from Jessica Rowley, one of, I imagine, 5 or 6 communications people at NIWA, the National Institute for Water and Atmospheric Research. And they say NIWA's Historic Weather Events website, and their website has been used by all the woke journalists to say the weather's getting worse, that's because of climate change, we must stop drinking dairy. That's kind of the genesis of the stupidity we're reading now. But here is what, and this is the only Jessica Rowley, can't provide anyone from NIWA to give us an interview on this and explain what Ian's written about. But here's what they said, and I want to read it in full so that you can understand how difficult it is getting the truth out of government departments. So here's what they said. The Historic Weathers Events website is a catalogue of major weather events in New Zealand over the last 200 years where significant damage or casualties occurred. NIWA sees it as a valuable resource provided primarily for the public, and we are not aware of anything else that provides similar information for Aotearoa, New Zealand, in one place. The information it contains has been collated from newspaper reports, journals, books and databases kindly provided by various organisations and individuals, and a lot of archive work went into building it. More historic data has been available online since the site was built. We continue to develop the site and will add missing events and additional details as we can, particularly those in the 1800s for which we still have to validate the data. The most recent update to the site was in 2021, and we are planning to continue this updating when resources are available. The Historic Weather Events website was not a data source NIWA used for the analysis that resulted in the assertion that Cyclone Gabrielle was one of the most destructive weather events on record for Aotearoa. Ends Jess. So that's it. That's all we are getting out of NIWA, and it's brilliant that it answers not a single substantive question. That Ian Wishart's excellent piece, Climate of Fear, raised. Ian Wishart joins us now. Ian, you've had no more than that out of NIWA?
No, we've had nothing more from NIWA, but I tell you this, that news release is damning, and this is the reason why. They reveal in the middle of the news release that they don't have the additional details for the events in the 1800s, and they still have to validate the data for those before they can add it to the Historic Weather Events website. Now, what that means is they haven't got it validated or entered into their main database either, because if they had it, it'd just be a simple copy and paste mechanism. They could have updated the database easily. They don't have the historic weather event records at all for the past, and that means that their statement at the end of the press release saying Cyclone Gabrielle was one of the most destructive weather events on record for Aotearoa.
Well, they've told us how they didn't come up with that analysis, but what they don't tell us is how they did.
Exactly, and it's clear from that press release that they don't have the details in their website, which means they can't make that comparison, which means basically that they are lying, which is the question I avoided last week. You
say they are lying, that NIWA are lying to us.
Yeah, I think it's now reached the stage where there's been absolute radio silence until this. They're now admitting they don't have the data in their system. If they had, they would have copied and pasted across the Historic Weather Events website. They haven't done that. They're saying that they're still calling Gabrielle one of the most destructive events on record. But what does on record actually mean?
Yeah, exactly. For them, 2 weeks is probably okay. Now, if you don't include data in your database, you don't have a record.
How good are their records? This entire farce has shown up that NIWA doesn't have the record and has been effectively, in my opinion, bluffing it all the way through.
The problem is, Ian, I wouldn't have a problem with a government department being incompetent, keeping bad records and not doing its job properly. How I almost expect it of a bureaucracy. The problem I see is that the misinformation or disinformation, to use the common term, therefore, that NIWA has released, has caused a cascade of public opinion with serious consequences, and that is that mainstream media have swallowed this is the most destructive.
No, they intentionally swallow it because it fits their own narrative as well.
They have then used the misinformation on climate change to say it's climate change related when it's clearly not. And they then promulgate the idea that we must change government policies or stop drinking milk or anything. That's actually the consequence of this one piece of bureaucratic incompetence, isn't it? That we end up living in a world that isn't based on science or facts.
Yeah, but it's even worse than that. If you look at it this way, NIWA has been in existence for 31 years as a government research entity. In 31 years, they have never bothered, according to their press release, to fully research New Zealand's climate past, yet they have spent 31 years telling us how things are getting worse from the past. They have not done the work. Now, if they had done the work, you've got to ask the question, would subdivisions have been built in floodplains? Would NIWA's advice to council and government have been different 15, 20 years ago? And they said, no, we go back and we look at 1868. This is a real bad situation. We don't want to build here. They haven't done the work. This is costing people in terms of insurance policy premiums. It's costing people in terms of rebuilds. It's costing people in terms of petrol taxes and levies and all sorts of government things. The work simply hasn't been done. And this is New Zealand's supposedly premier climate research institute. This is a scandal of major proportions.
Exactly. Yeah, now folks, I'm not convinced the government is following NIWA. Quite the opposite. NIWA is a puppet of the government, and in turn the government is a puppet of the UN and the WEF. Anyway folks, I've posted the rest of the links below as well.